I never thought I'd be locked in a legal battle with my neighborhood HOA over a warehouse I didn't even live in. But here I was, watching their president stand in my driveway with her arms crossed and a scowl that could freeze hell itself. My name is Thompson, and I'd bought a small industrial property about 2 miles outside of Greenville, South Carolina, 3 years ago. The warehouse wasn't fancy, just a solid 10,000 square foot metal building with decent insulation, concrete floors, and enough space to store my construction equipment and supplies for my contracting business. The property sat on the edge of town, technically within the city limits, but far enough from residential areas that I never expected any problems. I was wrong. The trouble started in January when the worst ice storm in 20 years hit South Carolina. The weather forecasters had been warning about it for days, talking about how this polar vortex was going to dump freezing rain and sleet across the entire southeastern United States. Schools closed preemptively, grocery stores got stripped bare, and everyone battened down the hatches. I'd secured my warehouse, made sure everything was locked up tight, and headed home to my actual house about 15 minutes away in the Meadowbrook subdivision. That's when my phone started ringing. It was 9 at night, the ice was already coating everything outside, and an unknown number flashed on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Thompson?" a woman's voice asked sharply. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Patricia Worthington, president of the Meadowbrook Community Association. We have an emergency situation and we need access to your warehouse immediately." I sat up straighter on my couch, confused. What are you talking about?" "The community maintenance building has lost power and the roof is leaking badly. We have thousands of dollars worth of equipment that's going to be destroyed if we don't move it somewhere dry right now. Your warehouse is the closest suitable location." "Hold on," I said, my mind racing. "How do you even know about my warehouse?" "Everyone knows you have that property on Industrial Park Drive. We need to use it, just for a few days until we can get the maintenance building fixed." The audacity of this woman was astounding. "You can't just use my property without permission." "Mr. Thompson, this is an emergency. The HOA bylaws clearly state that in times of community crisis, all resources can be requisitioned for the common good. Lady, that warehouse isn't part of the HOA. It's not even in the same zone as the subdivision. But you are a resident of Meadowbrook, which means you're subject to our bylaws." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "That's not how any of this works. You can't just take over property that isn't even within the HOA boundaries. We'll discuss the legalities later. Right now, we're in crisis mode. I'm coming with our maintenance team to your warehouse in 30 minutes. We'll need the keys." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Find somewhere else." She hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, half convinced the woman was just bluffing. No one could be that entitled, right? But 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Jerry, my neighbor from 2 doors down. "Connor, man, you need to see what's happening at your warehouse," Jerry said breathlessly. "What are you talking about?" "How do you know anything's happening there?" "I'm doing a night shift at the hospital and I drove past your place on the way in. There's like 6 trucks there and people are trying to break into your building." My blood ran cold. "Call the police. I'm on my way." The drive to the warehouse was terrifying. The roads were sheets of ice and my truck slipped and slid despite the 4-wheel drive. It normally took 10 minutes to get there, but it took me almost 40 that night, crawling along at 15 miles per hour with my hazards on. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were indeed 6 vehicles there, including a large box truck. The bay door of my warehouse was wide open, and people were carrying equipment inside. Bright work lights illuminated the scene, running off what looked like a portable generator. I parked and carefully made my way across the icy pavement toward the entrance. A police cruiser pulled in behind me, lights flashing. Someone called about a break-in. The officer asked, stepping out of his vehicle carefully. Yeah, that was me. Or my friend called. This is my property and these people are trespassing. We walked together toward the warehouse. Patricia Worthington emerged from inside, wearing an expensive parka and designer boots that were completely unsuitable for the ice storm. She was probably in her early 50s, with blonde highlights, and the kind of face that looked like it was permanently prepared to ask for a manager. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she said before I could say anything. "We need help moving some heavy equipment." "Madam, I'm here because the property owner reported a break-in," the officer said, his tone professional but firm. "Property owner? Oh, you mean Connor." "This is all just a misunderstanding. We had an emergency with our HOA maintenance facility, and we needed temporary storage. Connor is one of our residents, so naturally we assumed he'd want to help the community." "You assumed wrong," I said, anger rising in my voice. "You broke into my warehouse." "We didn't break anything. We picked the lock, which is a completely different thing, and we were very careful." The police officer looked at her incredulously. "Madam, that's still illegal entry." "Officer, surely you understand this was a crisis situation. We have nearly $80,000 worth of landscaping equipment, tools, and supplies that would have been destroyed. What were we supposed to do? Not break into someone else's property," I said. "There are storage facilities all over Greenville." "All closed due to the storm," Patricia shot back. "Besides, your warehouse was empty. You're not even using most of this space." "That doesn't matter. It's my property." The officer stepped between us. "All right, everyone calm down. Madam, I need the names of everyone here and you need to remove everything from this building right now." Patricia's face turned red. "In the middle of an ice storm, that's completely unreasonable. Officer, I'm sure we can work something out. This is a civil matter, not criminal." "You admitted to picking a lock and entering property without permission. That's criminal trespass." For the first time, Patricia looked uncertain. Several other people had emerged from the warehouse, including a couple I recognized from the subdivision. Tom Henderson and his wife Marie lived on my street. They both looked uncomfortable. "Connor, we're really sorry about this," Tom said. "Patricia told us you'd given permission." "If we'd known." "I never gave permission," I said. "Did she actually tell you that?" Tom and Marie exchanged glances. "She said it was all arranged," Marie admitted quietly. The officer was taking notes. "So you lied to your own volunteers about having permission." "I did no such thing," Patricia protested. "I simply said that Connor would understand the situation." "These people are choosing to interpret that as a lie." "Madam, you're digging yourself deeper," the officer warned. "Now you have two choices. You can remove everything from this building right now, in this ice storm, or Mr. Thompson here can allow you to leave it temporarily while we sort this out. But if he chooses the second option, you're going to need to make arrangements to compensate him." I was still angry, but I wasn't heartless. Looking at Tom and Marie and the other volunteers, I could see they were just people trying to help their community. They'd been manipulated by Patricia. "Fine," I said. "The stuff can stay for now. But we're drawing up a formal rental agreement, and the HOA is paying me fair market rate for warehouse storage." "We'll do no such thing," Patricia said immediately. "The bylaws clearly state, the bylaws of an HOA that has no jurisdiction over this property," I interrupted. "You want to use my warehouse, you pay rent. Otherwise, start loading up those trucks." The officer nodded. "Sounds fair to me. "Madam, I'm going to give you a warning tonight given the emergency circumstances, but if Mr. Thompson wants to press charges for the illegal entry, that's his right." Patricia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "How much?" "Standard warehouse rental in this area runs about $6 per square foot per year," I said, pulling the number from memory of my own lease agreements. "You've got how much equipment in there?" Tom spoke up. "We used about 1,500 square feet. So that's $9,000 a year, works out to $750 a month. Prorated daily, you're looking at about $25 a day." "That's highway robbery," Patricia sputtered. "No, that's the going rate. You want to check with other storage places, be my guest. But anything coming out of my warehouse right now goes out in this ice storm." We stood there in a tense standoff, ice continuing to fall around us. Finally, Patricia pulled out her phone and made a call, walking a few feet away. I could hear her speaking in angry, hushed tones with someone. The officer took my statement and information, then got statements from Tom, Marie, and the other volunteers. It turned out there were 8 people total who'd been involved in moving the equipment. All of them confirmed that Patricia had at least strongly implied that she'd gotten my permission. After about 20 minutes, Patricia returned. "Fine. We'll pay your ridiculous rent, but only until the repairs are done on our facility. The contractor says 3 days, maybe 4. "Get me that in writing," I said. We went into my small warehouse office where I kept basic supplies and paperwork. I pulled out a standard rental agreement template I used for short-term equipment storage for other contractors. It was simple and straightforward, laying out the terms, the daily rate, liability clauses, and payment terms. Patricia read through it with narrowed eyes, looking for any loophole she could exploit. Finally, she signed it with an angry flourish. "You'll be hearing from our attorney about this," she muttered. "Looking forward to it," I replied. The police officer made copies of the agreement for his report, then everyone left. I secured the warehouse again, this time adding a new padlock to make sure no one else could pick their way in. The ice storm continued to rage as I made the treacherous drive home. The next morning, Greenville looked like a snow globe. Everything was coated in a thick layer of ice, trees were down all over the place, and power was out in most of the city. Fortunately, my house had a generator, so I had heat and electricity. I made coffee and checked the news, seeing reports of the widespread damage. My phone started buzzing with text messages. Several were from other neighbors in Meadowbrook, people I didn't know that well but who apparently had heard about the previous night's drama. The HOA drama mill worked faster than any news network. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Wendy Abbott, who introduced herself as a member of the HOA board. She asked if she could meet with me to discuss the situation. I agreed, curious about what she wanted. Wendy showed up at my door that afternoon. She was probably in her late 30s, dressed casually in jeans and a warm sweater, and she looked exhausted. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for seeing me," she said, accepting my offer of coffee. "I want to apologize for what Patricia did last night. The rest of the board had no idea she was planning to break into your warehouse. How is she the HOA president if the rest of the board doesn't know what she's doing?" Wendy sighed heavily. "Patricia has been president for 5 years. She runs things like her personal fiefdom. Most of the board members are too intimidated to stand up to her, and she's very good at following just enough procedure to make everything seem legitimate. Picking locks isn't legitimate. I know. Believe me, I know. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to gather information about everything that's been going on. This isn't the first time Patricia has overstepped, but it might be the incident that finally gets her removed." I leaned back in my chair, studying Wendy. She seemed genuine, but I'd been burned before by HOA politics. What other incidents have there been? Where do I start? Wendy pulled out a notebook. She's filed liens on properties without proper board approval, hired her brother-in-law's company for maintenance work at inflated prices, and she keeps trying to expand the HOA's authority beyond what's in our actual bylaws. Last month, she tried to fine someone for having a boat in their driveway, even though our rules explicitly allow it. Sounds like a piece of work. That's putting it mildly. Look, I know you have every right to be angry and to press charges if you want. But I'm hoping we can work something out that's fair to you while also not bankrupting the HOA. Our dues are paid by regular homeowners, and they shouldn't have to suffer because Patricia is on a power trip. I appreciated her honesty. I'm not trying to bankrupt anyone. I just want fair compensation for the use of my property. If the HOA pays the rental rate for however long the equipment is there, we're square. That's reasonable, but I need you to understand that Patricia is going to fight this. She's already sent emails to the entire board claiming that your warehouse should be considered an HOA asset because you're a member. That's insane. I know, but she's got a couple of board members who will back her up on anything. They're her friends, and they all think the same way. The subdivision is their kingdom, and anyone who lives there owes them complete obedience. The warehouse isn't even in the subdivision. Facts don't matter to people like Patricia. She'll twist this into some kind of community betrayal story. You'll be the villain who refused to help in a crisis. I thought about that for a moment. Let her try. I've got a police report documenting that she broke into my property, and I've got witnesses who'll testify that she lied about having permission. If she wants to make this into a big deal, I'm ready. Wendy nodded slowly. Okay, I'll support you if it comes to that, so will a few other board members. But you should know that this could get ugly. Patricia doesn't lose gracefully. She wasn't kidding. Over the next week, as Greenville slowly recovered from the ice storm, I started getting letters from the HOA. The first one was a formal notice that I was in violation of Section 8.3 of the Community Bylaws for failure to maintain community spirit and neighborly cooperation. The fine was $500. I called Wendy immediately. What the hell is this? Oh God, she actually did it, Wendy groaned. That's a completely made-up violation. That section doesn't say anything about community spirit. It's about maintaining your property's exterior. So what do I do? Ignore it. Don't pay the fine. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. This has gone too far. The second letter arrived 2 days later. This one claimed I'd violated parking regulations by having commercial vehicles at my residence. The thing is, I kept my work trucks at the warehouse specifically to avoid any HOA issues. The only vehicle at my house was my personal truck. The third letter was the most audacious. It stated that because I owned commercial property within Greenville city limits, I was required to register it with the HOA and pay an additional annual fee of $2,000 for commercial resident status. I'd never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the subdivision clubhouse. I wasn't technically invited, but Wendy told me to show up anyway. She wanted Patricia confronted in front of the entire board. The clubhouse was a nice facility, paid for by resident dues over the years. It had a large meeting room, a small kitchen, and a pool area that was closed for winter. When I arrived, I found about 15 people there, including the 7 board members and several residents who'd heard about the drama. Patricia sat at the head of the table, looking smug. When she saw me walk in, her expression turned to ice. "This is a closed board meeting," she said immediately. "Residents can only attend if they are on the agenda." "He's on the agenda," Wendy said firmly, sitting at the opposite end of the table. I added him this morning. Without consulting me, without consulting the president, as is my right as secretary. The bylaws say any board member can add agenda items with 24-hour notice. I sent the email 28 hours ago. Patricia's jaw clenched. Fine. What's this about? It's about you abusing your authority, Wendy said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. It's about you breaking into Mr. Thompson's warehouse, lying about having permission, and then retaliating against him with bogus fines when he demanded fair compensation. I did no such thing. We have a police report, I said, pulling out copies. I'd brought enough for everyone. Officer James Matthews responded to a trespassing call at my warehouse. His report clearly states that you admitted to picking the lock and entering without permission. I distributed the copies around the table. The other board members read through them, and I watched their expressions change from curious to shocked. This is taken out of context, Patricia said quickly. It was an emergency situation. Our maintenance building was flooding, and we had to act fast to save HOA property. By breaking into someone else's property, said a man I didn't recognize. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and glasses. Patricia, this is serious. This could expose the HOA to massive liability. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Richard, Patricia snapped. Connor is a member of this community. What's ours is his, and what's his is ours. That's what being part of an HOA means. No, it really isn't, Richard replied. I'm an attorney, Patricia. I've told you before that you can't just make up rules as you go. The HOA has authority over properties within the subdivision boundaries and only regarding matters specified in the bylaws. We have zero authority over Connor's warehouse, but he lives here. That doesn't matter. His warehouse is separate property. If he wanted to refuse us access even in an emergency, that's his legal right. What you did was commit a crime. The room fell silent. Patricia looked around at the other board members, clearly expecting support. Most of them were looking at their copies of the police report or at the table. Furthermore, Richard continued, these retaliatory fines you've issued are completely improper. I've reviewed the bylaws and there's no basis for any of them. If Connor wanted to, he could sue the HOA for harassment. I'm not interested in suing anyone, I said. I just want to be paid the rent we agreed to, and I want these bogus fines dropped. The fines are legitimate, Patricia insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Let's put it to a vote, Wendy suggested. All in favor of rescinding the fines issued to Connor Thompson and honoring the rental agreement for warehouse storage. 6 hands went up immediately. Only Patricia and one other woman, who I later learned was her best friend Susan, kept their hands down. Motion carries, Wendy said. The fines are rescinded. Now, let's discuss the rental payment. Patricia, did you authorize payment from HOA funds? I most certainly did not. We're not paying rent on a property that should have been made available to us for free. The rental agreement is signed by you as HOA president, Wendy pointed out. That makes it a binding contract. I was under duress. That police officer was threatening to haul me to jail if I didn't sign. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's a complete lie. Officer Matthews gave you the option to remove all the equipment that night. You chose to sign the rental agreement instead. Richard was reading through the copy of the rental agreement. This is a standard commercial lease. The terms are quite reasonable, actually. Patricia, the HOA is obligated to pay this. If we refuse, Connor can take us to small claims court and will almost certainly win. Plus, we'll be on the hook for his legal fees. How long is the equipment staying in my warehouse anyway? I asked. You said 3 or 4 days. It's been almost 2 weeks. Patricia shifted in her seat. There have been delays with the repairs. The contractor had issues getting materials because of the storm damage across the region. When will the repairs be done? Another week, maybe 2. So we're looking at potentially a month total, I calculated. At $25 a day, that's $750. Completely unreasonable, Patricia muttered. Actually, that's quite cheap, Richard said. I looked up commercial storage rates in Greenville. Most places charge significantly more, especially for climate-controlled space. My warehouse isn't climate-controlled, I pointed out, but it is secure and dry, which is what matters. Patricia, the board is authorizing payment. Wendy, please write a check to Connor Thompson for the amount owed so far, and we'll settle the final balance once the equipment is removed. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is absurd. I'm the president of this HOA, and I'm being treated like a criminal for trying to protect community assets. You are being held accountable for your actions, Wendy said calmly. There's a difference. I want a formal vote of confidence from the board. The room went silent again. A vote of confidence could potentially remove Patricia from her position if she lost. Judging by the mood in the room, that seemed likely. I'll second that motion, Richard said. All in favor of expressing confidence in Patricia Worthington as HOA president? 2 hands went up, Patricia's and Susan's. All opposed, 5 hands went up. The motion fails, Richard announced. Patricia, the board has expressed no confidence in your leadership. According to our bylaws, that means you're removed as president, effective immediately. We'll need to elect an interim president until the next general membership meeting. Patricia's face went through several shades of red. You can't do this. I've been president for 5 years. I've done more for this community than any of you combined. You've also overstepped your authority repeatedly, misused HOA funds, and now committed a crime that could expose us to liability, Richard said. It's time for new leadership. I'll sue. I'll sue all of you. On what grounds? Richard asked calmly. Everything we've done today is explicitly permitted by our bylaws. You're welcome to consult with your own attorney, but I can tell you right now that you don't have a case. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse. Susan followed her, throwing dirty looks at everyone. After they left, Richard looked at me apologetically. Connor, I'm sorry you got dragged into our HOA dysfunction. We'll get you paid immediately. I appreciate that, I said. For what it's worth, most of the people in this subdivision seem like good folks. It's just that one bad apple thing. Unfortunately, that bad apple has been running things for way too long, Wendy said. She looked exhausted but relieved. We should have stood up to her years ago. The board quickly voted Richard in as interim president. He was retired and had plenty of time to devote to HOA matters, and his legal background would help prevent future issues. Wendy wrote me a check for the storage fees accumulated so far, and we agreed that I'd invoice them for the final amount once the equipment was removed. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong again. 3 days later, I got a call from the Greenville Police Department. Detective Sarah Morrison wanted to talk to me about an incident at the Meadowbrook Subdivision Clubhouse. What kind of incident? I asked. Property damage and theft. When can you come down to the station? I drove to the police station that afternoon, my mind racing. What did property damage at the clubhouse have to do with me? Detective Morrison was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen it all. She led me to a small interview room and offered me coffee, which I accepted. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in. I want to be clear that you're not a suspect in anything. We just need some background information. Background on what? Last night, someone broke into the Meadowbrook clubhouse and vandalized the office. They also stole several $1,000s worth of HOA equipment, including computers, a printer, and files. We have reason to believe this is connected to the recent conflict between you and the former HOA president. My stomach dropped. You think Patricia did this? We don't have any proof yet, but her name has come up. Multiple board members mentioned the dispute at the board meeting where she was removed. We're talking to everyone involved to establish a timeline and gather information. I told Detective Morrison everything that had happened, from the ice storm incident to the board meeting. She took detailed notes and asked follow-up questions. "Has Patricia contacted you since the board meeting?" she asked. "No, nothing. I figured she'd moved on." "Have you received any threats or harassment?" "Not since the bogus fines, which were rescinded." Detective Morrison nodded, making more notes. "Okay. If Patricia or anyone else contacts you about this situation, please let me know immediately. And if you notice anything unusual around your home or warehouse, call us right away." "You really think she'd come after me?" "Mr. Thompson, in my experience, people who are used to having power don't react well when it's taken away. Patricia Worthington has been running that HOA like her personal kingdom for years. Being removed publicly like that, that's a major blow to her ego. Some people get angry. Some people get revenge." That was a chilling thought. I drove home feeling uneasy, checking my rearview mirror more than usual. The next day, Wendy called me. "Connor, have you heard what happened at the clubhouse?" The police called me in for a statement. "It's worse than they probably told you. Whoever broke in didn't just steal equipment. They destroyed financial records going back 3 years. They spray-painted profanity all over the walls, and they broke into the maintenance shed and took tools worth thousands of dollars." Jesus. Do they know it was Patricia? The police aren't saying officially, but between you and me. They found her fingerprints in the office. She's claiming she went there the day after the board meeting to collect her personal belongings, which she's allowed to do. But the security camera footage shows someone matching her description entering the building at 2 in the morning on the night of the break-in. Security cameras. I didn't see any cameras when I was there. Richard had them installed last year after some vandalism at the pool. Patricia didn't want them, said they were an invasion of privacy, but the board overruled her. Guess we know why she didn't want cameras now. So she's going to be arrested, probably. The police are building their case. The problem is that the stolen computers had all of our financial records, including records of some questionable transactions. Richard thinks Patricia has been embezzling from the HOA for years. This just kept getting worse. How much are we talking about? We don't know yet. Richard is trying to reconstruct the finances from bank statements, but there are payments to vendors that don't seem legitimate, checks written to cash, things like that. It could be tens of thousands of dollars over the years. I let out a low whistle. So this isn't just about the warehouse thing anymore. No, that was just the catalyst that brought everything else to light. Connor, I want to thank you for standing up to her. If you hadn't demanded that rental agreement and forced the board meeting, we might never have discovered the financial irregularities. I'm not sure I should be thanked. Sounds like I poked a hornet's nest. A hornet's nest that needed poking, Wendy said firmly. This subdivision is better off without her in charge. 2 weeks later, Patricia Worthington was arrested. The charges included burglary, vandalism, theft, and embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed her entering the clubhouse with a key she wasn't supposed to have anymore. Her fingerprints were on the spray paint cans found in a dumpster near her house. And the financial records Richard had reconstructed showed years of suspicious transactions, including payments to a fake company that turned out to be Patricia's personal account. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested for embezzlement, ran on the evening news, complete with Patricia's mugshot and footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs. I watched it on TV with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. My phone rang constantly that evening. Other residents from Meadowbrook wanted to talk, wanted to know what I knew, wanted to share their own stories of Patricia's abuse of power. It turned out that a lot of people had grievances they'd been too intimidated to voice before. One call stood out. It was from Tom Henderson, the neighbor who'd been at my warehouse during the ice storm. "Connor, I need to apologize to you properly," Tom said. His voice was heavy with regret. "Marie and I were helping Patricia because we thought it was the right thing to do. We should have questioned her more when she said you'd given permission. We should have insisted on hearing it from you directly. Tom, you guys were trying to help the community. I get it. Still, we were part of breaking into your property. If you had pressed charges that night, we could have been arrested too. But you weren't the ones who lied about having permission. Patricia manipulated all of you. That doesn't make it okay. Look, Marie and I talked, and we want to do something to make this right. We know you're not asking for it, but we'd like to pay you something for the use of your warehouse. Not the HOA's portion, but a personal contribution for our involvement." "Tom, that's not necessary. Please, it would make us feel better. $100, just as a gesture of good faith." I could hear how important this was to him. "All right, thank you, but you guys don't owe me anything beyond being good neighbors. We will be, and Connor, thank you for not throwing us under the bus. A lot of people would have." After that call, I felt a little better about the whole situation. Most of the people in Meadowbrook were good folks who'd just been under the thumb of a tyrant. With Patricia gone, maybe the subdivision could get back to being an actual community instead of a dictatorship. The HOA equipment remained in my warehouse for another week. The contractor finally finished repairs on the maintenance building, and Richard coordinated the move out. He insisted on being there personally to supervise, along with Wendy and several other residents. "We want to make sure everything is done properly this time," Richard explained when they showed up with a moving truck. "And we want to inspect your warehouse to make sure we didn't cause any damage." "I appreciate that," I said, opening the bay door. The move out took most of a morning. The volunteers were careful and organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic midnight operation during the ice storm. When everything was loaded, Richard walked through the warehouse with me, checking for any issues. "Looks good," he said. "Your concrete floor held up well under the weight of the equipment. No cracks or damage that I can see." "It's built pretty solid," I agreed. Richard pulled out an envelope. "Final payment with a little extra as a thank you for your patience and understanding throughout this mess." I opened the envelope and counted the cash. It was $200 more than we'd agreed on. "Richard, this is too much. Consider it a bonus for putting up with Patricia's nonsense. The board voted on it. We also wanted to give you this." He handed me a formal letter on HOA letterhead. It was a resolution from the board, officially thanking me for my cooperation and apologizing for the unauthorized entry into my warehouse. It also included a statement clearing me of all fines and confirming that I had acted properly throughout the situation. "I don't know what to say," I told him honestly. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you've got friends in Meadowbrook. If you ever need anything, if there's ever a real emergency, you can count on us, and we'll ask first next time." Everyone laughed at that. The legal proceedings against Patricia took months to unfold. She initially pleaded not guilty to all charges, but as the evidence mounted, her attorney convinced her to take a plea deal. She ended up pleading guilty to embezzlement and criminal trespass, with the other charges dropped as part of the agreement. At her sentencing hearing in late summer, I was surprised to receive a subpoena to testify. The prosecutor wanted me to describe the break-in and its impact. I took a day off work and showed up at the Greenville County Courthouse in a suit, feeling nervous despite having done nothing wrong. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Patricia looked diminished sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. She'd aged 10 years in the month since her arrest, her blonde hair showing gray roots and her face drawn. When I was called to the stand, I swore to tell the truth, and then answered the prosecutor's questions about the ice storm, the warehouse break-in, and the aftermath. I kept my answers factual and unemotional, just describing what had happened. Patricia's attorney tried to make it seem like I'd been unreasonable in demanding rent, but the prosecutor shut that down quickly by pointing out that I'd actually been quite generous given the circumstances. After my testimony, several other Meadowbrook residents took the stand. They described years of Patricia's bullying, unauthorized fines, and financial mismanagement. One elderly man testified that Patricia had placed a lien on his house over a disputed $50 fine, nearly causing him to lose his home. The portrait that emerged was of someone who'd viewed her HOA position as a license to control and extract money from her neighbors. The embezzlement charges were the most serious, with evidence showing she'd stolen nearly $60,000 from HOA funds over 4 years. When it came time for sentencing, the judge was not sympathetic. He sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, with credit for time served, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA. She'd also be on probation for 5 years after her release, and was prohibited from serving on any HOA board for life. As the bailiff led her away, Patricia looked back at the courtroom. Her eyes found mine for just a moment, and I saw nothing but hatred there. It sent a chill down my spine, but I reminded myself that she'd be in prison for a while and under strict supervision after that. Outside the courthouse, Richard and Wendy thanked me for testifying. Several other residents who'd been there introduced themselves and shook my hand. It felt like the end of a long ordeal. "What happens to the HOA now?" I asked Richard. "We rebuild," he said. "We've already implemented new financial controls, including requiring 2 signatures on all checks and quarterly audits. We're also revising the bylaws to limit the president's authority and add recall provisions. This should never happen again." "That's good to hear." "And we're planning a community barbecue next month, kind of a fresh start celebration. You're invited, of course. We'd love to have you there." I agreed to come, though I felt a little awkward about it. I'd never been very social in the subdivision, preferring to keep to myself. But maybe it was time to change that. The barbecue turned out to be a great event. Nearly every house in Meadowbrook was represented, and the mood was celebratory. Kids ran around the pool area while adults grilled burgers and hot dogs. Richard gave a short speech about the subdivision's new beginning, and everyone applauded. I met dozens of neighbors I'd only seen in passing before. Most of them had stories about Patricia, ranging from annoying to infuriating. One common thread was relief that she was gone. "It's like we can breathe again," one woman told me. She lived 3 houses down from me and had been terrified of Patricia for years. "I used to be afraid to park my car 5 minutes past the visitor time limit. She'd have a fine on my door before I could get my groceries inside." "That's insane," I said. "That was Patricia. Everything was about control. You standing up to her was the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood." I didn't feel like a hero, but I appreciated the sentiment. The truth was, I'd just been protecting my property rights. The fact that it had exposed a corrupt HOA president was almost accidental. As the barbecue wound down, Wendy approached me with a proposition. "Connor, the board has an opening for a member. Would you consider joining me?" I don't know anything about running an HOA. Neither did most of us when we started, but you've shown good judgment and a willingness to stand up for what's right. That's what we need. Plus, your construction background would be helpful for maintenance issues. I thought about it. The idea of sitting through HOA meetings didn't exactly thrill me, but I could see the value in being part of the process rather than just subject to it. Let me think about it, I said. Over the next few weeks, I did think about it. I also paid closer attention to what the HOA was doing. Richard and the new board were making real changes, implementing the reforms they'd discussed. Financial reports were being posted online for all residents to see. Meeting minutes were being distributed promptly. There was actual transparency. I decided to accept Wendy's offer. My first board meeting was awkward, as I wasn't used to the formalities and procedures. But Richard was patient in explaining how everything worked, and the other members were welcoming. My role ended up being primarily focused on maintenance and capital improvements. My construction knowledge came in handy when evaluating contractor bids and assessing needed repairs. I also helped develop a long-term plan for updating the subdivision's infrastructure. It was more work than I'd expected, but also more rewarding. I got to know my neighbors better. I had input into decisions that affected my property value and quality of life. And I felt like I was part of something positive rather than just a victim of HOA tyranny. One interesting development was that several other subdivisions in the area reached out to Richard for advice on preventing similar situations. Word had spread about what happened in Meadowbrook, and other HOAs wanted to implement better oversight and controls. Richard started giving presentations at community meetings, sharing lessons learned. I even got a call from a local news station asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed for a story about HOA reform. I declined, not wanting to be in the spotlight, but I gave them Richard's contact information. He ended up doing several interviews, becoming something of a local advocate for responsible HOA governance. As fall arrived, bringing cooler weather and changing leaves, life in Meadowbrook had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The drama of the Patricia era seemed like a distant memory, though the legal proceedings were still ongoing. The civil lawsuit to recover the embezzled funds was working its way through the courts, and it looked like the HOA would eventually recover most of the money, though it would take time. My warehouse business continued to thrive. I'd actually gained several new clients after word spread about how I'd handled the HOA situation. Other contractors respected that I'd stood my ground and demanded fair compensation. It turned into unexpected positive publicity. One Saturday morning in October, I was at the warehouse doing inventory when a car pulled into the parking lot. I didn't recognize the vehicle, a newer Toyota sedan. A woman got out, probably in her 30s with dark hair and a professional appearance. "Connor Thompson," she asked, approaching me. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Jennifer Marks. I'm a reporter with the Greenville Gazette. I'm doing a follow-up story on the Patricia Worthington case, and I was hoping to talk to you about what happened." I hesitated. I'd avoided media attention so far, but the case was a matter of public record. Maybe it was time to tell my side of the story. "All right," I said. "What do you want to know?" We sat in my warehouse office, and I walked Jennifer through the entire timeline, from the ice storm to Patricia's sentencing. She took notes and asked thoughtful questions, clearly having done her homework on the case. "What strikes me about your story," she said, "is that you could have just let them use your warehouse for free. It would have avoided all this conflict. Why didn't you?" "Because it was wrong," I said simply. "They broke into my property without permission and then tried to act like I was the bad guy for objecting. If I'd let that slide, What message would that send? That HOAs can just take whatever they want from residents. That was already Patricia's attitude. Someone needed to draw a line. Even though drawing that line meant months of harassment and legal drama. I didn't know it would lead to all that. But yeah, even knowing what I know now, I do the same thing. Property rights matter. Consent matters. You can't just take what isn't yours, even in an emergency, and expect no consequences. Jennifer nodded, still writing. Have you had any contact with Patricia since her sentencing? No, thank God. I hope I never see her again. What about the other residents of Meadowbrook? How has your relationship with the community changed? I thought about that. It's actually better than before. I used to just keep to myself, barely knew my neighbors. Now I'm on the HOA board, I go to community events, I know people's names. In a weird way, this whole mess brought us closer together. The article came out 2 weeks later. Jennifer had done a good job, presenting a balanced view of what had happened while making clear that Patricia's actions were inexcusable. The headline read, How One Man's Stand Against HOA Overreach Exposed Years of Corruption. Several people mentioned seeing the article. I got calls from friends I hadn't talked to in months, and even my parents called from Florida to say they'd seen it online. It was a little embarrassing, but also validating. My story had struck a chord with people who dealt with their own HOA issues. The article also attracted attention from a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. He reached out to offer his services if I ever needed them, explaining that cases like mine were becoming more common as HOAs grew more powerful, and some board members abused their authority. You did everything right, he told me over the phone. You documented everything, you got the police involved immediately, and you stood firm on your rights. A lot of people would have caved to the pressure. I'm stubborn, I admitted. Stubborn can be good when you're in the right. As winter approached again, almost a year after the ice storm that started everything, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. My warehouse had been broken into. I'd been harassed with bogus fines. I'd testified in a criminal case, and I'd become an active member of my HOA board. It wasn't the year I'd planned, but in some ways, it had been valuable. I'd learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's difficult. I'd learned that most people are fundamentally decent and will do the right thing when they're not being manipulated. And I'd learned that community, when done right, can be a positive thing. The Meadowbrook HOA was thriving under Richard's leadership. We'd completed several improvement projects, including new LED lighting for common areas and repairs to the pool house. Dues were being used responsibly and transparently. Residents were actually attending meetings because they trusted the board. At the December board meeting, Richard announced he'd be stepping down as president at the end of his term. He was in his 70s and wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren. The board would need to elect a new president. To my surprise, Wendy nominated me. Connor has shown excellent judgment and dedication over the past year. He understands both the practical and legal aspects of HOA management. I think he'd make an excellent president. I was stunned. I've only been on the board for 6 months, and you've accomplished more in that time than some members who have been here for years, another board member said. I second the nomination. There were no other nominations. The vote was unanimous. I was now the president of the Meadowbrook HOA. I'll do my best, I said, feeling the weight of responsibility, but I want to be clear about something. This HOA exists to serve the residents, not the other way around. We're here to maintain property values and common areas, not to control people's lives. If I ever start acting like Patricia, I want someone to call me out immediately. Everyone laughed, but they got the message. My first major decision as president came a week later, when a resident requested permission to install solar panels on their roof. The old HOA rules, written by Patricia, prohibited any roof modifications that altered the appearance of the home. But times had changed, and solar panels were becoming increasingly common and valuable. I called a special board meeting to discuss revising the solar panel policy. After some debate, we agreed to allow them with certain aesthetic guidelines. The resident was thrilled, and several other homeowners expressed interest in installing panels as well. It was a small thing, but it represented a shift in how the HOA operated. We were adapting to residents' needs rather than rigid arbitrary rules. As Christmas approached, I received an unexpected card in the mail. It was from Tom and Marie Henderson. Inside was a heartfelt note thanking me for my leadership and for helping transform the subdivision into a true community. They'd enclosed a photo of the neighborhood decorated for the holidays, lights twinkling on every house. I put the card on my refrigerator, a reminder of why the hassle and headaches had been worth it. On Christmas Eve, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a group of about 20 neighbors, including Richard, Wendy, Tom, Marie, and many others I'd gotten to know over the past year. They were caroling, singing "Deck the Halls" with more enthusiasm than skill. When they finished, Richard handed me a wrapped package. "From all of us," he said, "a small token of appreciation for everything you've done." I opened it to find a custom-made wooden plaque. It read, "Connor Thompson, defender of property rights, exposer of corruption, and friend to Meadowbrook. Thank you for standing up when it mattered." I was genuinely moved. "Thank you all. This means a lot." "We mean it," Wendy said. "What you did took courage, and what you're doing now as HOA president is making this neighborhood better every day." After the carolers left, I sat in my living room looking at the plaque. A year ago, I'd been a guy who kept to himself, owned a warehouse, and avoided HOA drama. Now I was in the middle of it by choice, trying to make things better. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia's attempt to use my warehouse without permission had led to her downfall and my unexpected involvement in community leadership. If she just asked nicely and offered to pay rent from the beginning, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, probably still embezzling money and bullying residents. Sometimes standing your ground has consequences you never expected. Sometimes saying no to the wrong thing leads to opportunities you never imagined. The following spring, the HOA held its annual meeting, the first I'd preside over as president. Nearly every household was represented, a record turnout. I gave a report on the state of the association, highlighting the financial recovery from Patricia's embezzlement, the improvements we'd made, and the plans for the coming year. Then I opened the floor for questions and comments. Instead of complaints and grievances, residents offered suggestions and volunteered for committees. People wanted to be involved because they trusted the board again. One elderly resident stood up, the same man who testified about nearly losing his home due to Patricia's lien. "I just want to say thank you to this board," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "For the first time in years, I don't dread coming home. I don't worry about finding a fine on my door for some made-up violation. This feels like a real neighborhood again." The room erupted in applause. I had to fight back tears. After the meeting, as people mingled over cookies and coffee, I stepped outside for some air. Wendy joined me. "You did good in there," she said. "We all did good. This is a team effort." "Still, you set the tone. People respond to your leadership style. You're firm but fair, and you actually listen. That's rare in HOA presidents." "I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. Revolutionary concept, I know," she laughed. In HOA world, yeah, it kind of is. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the subdivision. Kids were playing in the street, neighbors were chatting in driveways, and everything felt peaceful. You ever think about what would have happened if you just let Patricia use your warehouse for free? Wendy asked. Sometimes. But honestly, I think it would have just delayed the inevitable. Someone else would have stood up to her eventually, or she would have gotten caught embezzling some other way. The system was broken. It needed to break completely before it could be fixed. Still, you were the catalyst. That takes guts. Or stubbornness. I'm still not sure which. As summer arrived, bringing long days and warm weather, life in Meadowbrook continued to improve. The HOA sponsored neighborhood picnics, movie nights at the clubhouse, and a community yard sale. Participation was high because people actually wanted to be involved. My warehouse business was doing better than ever. I'd expanded my client base and even hired 2 employees to help with the increased workload. The space that Patricia had tried to commandeer was now generating good income and supporting jobs. In July, I got a notification that Patricia had been released from prison on parole. She'd served just over a year of her 3-year sentence due to good behavior and prison overcrowding. Part of her parole conditions prohibited her from entering Meadowbrook, except to attend required restitution hearings. I'd be lying if I said that news didn't make me nervous. Patricia had looked at me with such hatred at her sentencing. But she was being monitored closely, and she had too much to lose by violating her parole. Still, I made sure my warehouse security system was up to date and that I locked everything carefully. Better safe than sorry. A few weeks later, Richard called me with news. Patricia is moving to Charlotte. Her attorney contacted me about the restitution payments. She's found work there and will be making monthly payments until the debt is cleared. That's good news, I said, relieved. Having her out of the state would definitely help me relax. It gets better. She's also selling her house in Meadowbrook. She can't afford to keep it with the restitution payments and the fact that she'll never be allowed on the board again. She wants nothing to do with this place anymore. Can't say I blame her, though she brought it all on herself. True. But it's closure for everyone. She's gone, she's paying back what she stole, and we can all move forward. That feeling of closure was real. Over the next few months, Patricia's house sold to a nice young couple with 2 kids. They fit right into the neighborhood, participating in events and being friendly neighbors. It was like the final piece of the Patricia puzzle had been replaced with something better. As fall arrived again, marking 2 years since the ice storm, the Meadowbrook HOA was virtually unrecognizable from what it had been under Patricia's rule. We had healthy reserves, transparent finances, fair rules, and an engaged community. My term as president was going well, though I'd already decided I'd only serve for 2 years. I wanted to make sure power didn't concentrate too long in one person's hands. One afternoon in October, I was at my warehouse when a young couple pulled up in a pickup truck. They introduced themselves as contractors looking for equipment storage. "We heard good things about your place," the man said. "Someone told us you're reliable and fair." "I try to be," I said, showing them around. As we walked through the warehouse, the woman noticed something. "Hey, is that spray paint on the wall over there? Looks like someone tried to cover it up." I looked where she was pointing. There was indeed a faint shadow on the wall that I'd never noticed before. It must have been from the night Patricia and her volunteers had loaded equipment in here. Some kind of mark that hadn't quite been painted over. "Yeah, it's from a couple years ago. Long story." "We're not in a hurry if you want to tell it," she said with a friendly smile. So I told them the whole story, from the ice storm to Patricia's arrest to becoming HOA president. They listened in amazement. "That's insane," the man said when I finished. "You really went through all that just because you asked them to pay rent." "Not just that. It was about the principle. They broke into my property, lied about it, and then tried to punish me for objecting. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it costs you." "Sounds like it worked out in the end, though," the woman observed. "It did. And I learned a lot along the way, about community, about leadership, about standing firm when you're right. They ended up renting space from me, and they became good clients. Over time, I told the story to several other people who asked about my involvement with the HOA or noticed mentions of it in online reviews of my business. Each time I told it, I was struck by how much had changed, and how a single moment of refusing to be pushed around had set off a chain reaction that transformed an entire community. The warehouse that Patricia had tried to use without permission had become a symbol of something larger, standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. 3 years after the ice storm, I attended a city council meeting where Richard was speaking about HOA reform legislation. He'd become something of an advocate, pushing for laws that would require more oversight and transparency for homeowner associations. His testimony drew on the Patricia Worthington case as a prime example of what could go wrong. Watching him speak, I felt proud. What had started as me protecting my property rights had evolved into a broader movement for accountability in HOA governance. Other subdivisions had implemented reforms similar to ours. The local media covered HOA issues more closely. Residents were more aware of their rights. After the meeting, Richard and I grabbed coffee. "You know, I've been thinking about writing a book," he said, "about what happened in Meadowbrook and the lessons learned. Would you be okay with me including your story?" "Sure, as long as you're honest about the fact that I didn't do anything heroic. I just refused to be walked over." "That's exactly the point," Richard said. "Most HOA abuse happens because people are afraid to push back. Your story shows what can happen when someone stands firm. It's important." "All right then. Write your book. Maybe it'll help someone else dealing with a tyrant on their HOA board." Richard's book came out the following year. It was titled Reclaiming Community: How One Neighborhood Overcame HOA Tyranny. My story featured prominently in the first few chapters, and Richard had done an excellent job of presenting it objectively while making the broader points about HOA governance and reform. The book got good reviews and decent sales, mostly among people dealing with their own HOA issues. Richard started getting invited to speak at community meetings and HOA conferences around the country. He'd found a new purpose in retirement, and I was happy for him. As for me, I finished my 2-year term as HOA president and gratefully handed the position over to a capable successor. I stayed on the board, but in a less demanding role. I'd done what I needed to do, and now it was time for others to lead. My warehouse business continued to thrive, and I even opened a second location on the other side of Greenville. The lessons I'd learned about standing firm in negotiations and demanding fair treatment served me well in business. I had a reputation for being tough but fair, which attracted good clients. 5 years after the ice storm, Meadowbrook held a community celebration marking the anniversary of Patricia's removal and the HOA's transformation. It was framed as a new beginning anniversary rather than explicitly being about Patricia, but everyone knew what it represented. Nearly the entire subdivision turned out for a potluck dinner at the clubhouse. Kids ran around playing games while adults caught up and shared food. The atmosphere was joyful and relaxed, exactly what a community should feel like. During the dinner, Wendy stood up to make a speech. She'd taken over as HOA president after my successor and was doing an excellent job. 5 years ago, This neighborhood was a very different place, she began. We were under the thumb of someone who saw the HOA as a personal power base rather than a service organization. Thanks to one person's courage in standing up to that abuse, everything changed. Connor Thompson, would you please stand up? Embarrassed, I stood while everyone applauded. Wendy continued. Connor didn't ask to be in the spotlight. He just wanted fair treatment for the use of his property. But his refusal to be bullied sparked a transformation that has made Meadowbrook the thriving, happy community it is today. Thank you, Connor, for everything. More applause, even some cheers. I waved awkwardly and sat down as quickly as I could. I'd never been comfortable with attention. But looking around at the smiling faces, the families enjoying time together, the neighbors who'd become friends, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Something good had come from all the conflict and stress. Patricia's attempt to abuse her power had backfired spectacularly, exposing her corruption and ultimately making the community stronger. That night, driving home from the celebration, I passed my warehouse. The parking lot was full of my clients' equipment and supplies, generating steady income and supporting my business. The building that had been broken into during that ice storm 5 years ago had become a symbol of standing firm and demanding respect. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered what her life was like in Charlotte. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, though I doubted it. People like her rarely acknowledged their mistakes, but that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem now was living my life, running my business, and being a good neighbor. The HOA drama was behind me, relegated to an interesting story I could tell at parties. Life in Meadowbrook was peaceful and pleasant, exactly what a subdivision should be. And if another ice storm ever hit Greenville, I knew the HOA wouldn't be breaking into anyone's warehouse. They'd ask nicely, offer fair compensation, and treat people's property rights with respect. The lessons had been learned, the reforms had stuck, and the community was better for it. Sometimes it takes a crisis to expose the cracks in a system. Sometimes it takes one person saying no to set off a chain reaction of positive change. And sometimes a simple demand for rent becomes a catalyst for transformation. I'd never set out to be that person, but I didn't regret how things had turned out. Standing up for yourself matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because if you don't respect your own rights, you can't expect anyone else to respect them either. The warehouse remained my property, my business, my small piece of the American dream. No one would ever take that from me without permission again. And if they tried, well, I'd learned exactly what to do. Document everything, call the police, demand fair treatment, and refuse to back down. It was a lesson I'd never forget, and one I hoped others would learn without having to go through what I went through. But if they did face similar situations, at least now there were resources, advocates like Richard, and examples like Meadowbrook showing that change was possible. 5 years after that ice storm, I could finally say the whole ordeal had been worth it. Not because I'd gained anything personally beyond some temporary stress and a plaque on my wall, but because I'd helped expose corruption and transform a community. That mattered more than rent money or vindication ever could. And on quiet evenings, sitting on my porch watching the sunset over Meadowbrook, I felt genuinely grateful to be part of a real community, one built on mutual respect rather than authoritarian control. Patricia's legacy wasn't the fear and control she'd tried to impose. It was the transformation that came after her fall, the positive changes that emerged from the ashes of her corruption. That was the real story worth telling, and I was proud to have been part of it.